Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter and I welcome you to yet another top 10 Cutter top 10 sports video. And we are doing the top 10 the top 10 scandalous NCAA football moments of all time. Basketball will have its own list, but football, let's talk about football. I mean, I am wearing the Arkansas shirt. So, woo! So, anyway, we're going to have some fun with this list. And of course, here we go, top 10. Number 10 is the Southwestern Conference was in the 1980s. There's one school in particular that had their own problems with a scandal, and yes, they will be on the list. They'll be higher up. But the fact of the matter is that the Southwest Conference in the 1980s just were pathetic. It was basically a school of nine universities, 8 from Texas, 1 from Arkansas. Almost everyone in the Southwestern Conference had faced a massive scandal, academic scandal in the 1980s, which involved pay to play and basically boosters and all that. Only Arkansas, I think Baylor and Rice were actually the 3 schools that got out of it that didn't even have a scandal and all that, which was big because like Texas A&M, Houston, SMU, uh, yeah, I guess Baylor had frig. There are other Houston schools. Yeah, but Texas A&M, Texas Tech had a scandal. Uh, you know, a lot of the schools in Texas had the big scandals and all that. Arkansas basically got out of it, but the scandals were basically why Arkansas left the Southwest Conference for the Southeast Conference in 1991. The SWC was a shell of its own self by the 90s and basically folded. Most teams going to Conference USA and most teams going to the Big 12, which was the Big 12 at the time. So that was a big story there. Number 9 is the kick 6 from the 2013 Iron Bowl. Now, sometimes worse means not really scandalous, but everything else. But anyway, the kick 6 was huge. Alabama was ranked number 1. Auburn was ranked number 4, if I remember correctly. Alabama went for a 56-yard field goal. Even if they missed it, as long as they didn't go back for a touchdown, we would be going to overtime. That would be perfect viewing for CBS in the Iron Bowl between the 2 Alabama main schools. But he missed it. And Christopher McKay, number 11 on your programs, basically ran the ball down the left-hand side, massive touchdown to beat the Crimson Tide in Auburn, and basically everyone was just bouncing off the walls who was not an Alabama fan. I can't remember the radio announcer. I think it's Bramlett, but he died a couple years earlier, a couple years ago. But yeah, that was his call. That's his jam. Number 8 is the Fiesta Bowl from 2003. Now, this was big. Miami and Ohio State were battling tooth and nail for a national championship in the desert. All Miami needed to do was win, and they could go back to back, which was unusual in the BCS era. But apparently, they had to lead in overtime. Ohio State did not have Maurice Claret. He got hurt. I think Miami had Willis McGahee get hurt in that game, too. But anyway, Ohio State missed on 4th down, so it was over. Miami was going to win the championship. Unfortunately, though, a flag came on the field, even though it was like a few seconds after incomplete, and basically there were like no flags. The announcers would have seen it. But in an illegal call, they said it was pass interference on Miami against Chris Gamble, which was like, it was ticky-tacky at best. Ohio State scored the touchdown in the first overtime, took the lead in the second overtime, and Miami couldn't score. So Ohio State shocked everyone by winning the 2003 Fiesta Bowl and leaving Miami fans outraged. That would be the best moment. The school basically faltered for like 5 to 10 years afterwards. Number 7 is the Baylor sexual assault scandal. Baylor had a lot of problems with their schools and all that. They had a college basketball problem with a scandal 13 years prior, which we will get to in that top 10. But anyway, it was systematic mishandling of sexual assault allegations involving football players. A lot of schools have them because the time of the the inquiries and basically the presence of mind. But anyway, the scandal did lead to firing of the coach, president, and athletic director, and basically reform policies nationwide. So everyone had to get their act together and all that. Number 6 is the 1984 Orange Bowl between Nebraska and Miami. And the fact that this was one heck of a game. Miami was lucky to get into the Orange Bowl. They were in front of their hometown fans. And Nebraska in 1984 was crushing the competition left, right, and center. And like winning lots of games with at least 50 points or more, like 7 or 8 times. So basically, it was Nebraska's tough offense against Miami's tough defense. It was a close game. Nebraska did have a touchdown on the famous fumble Lewski by Dean Steinkuhler. His name is always synonymous. But anyway, yeah, Miami had a big battle. Bernie Kosar was the pivot for Miami. Nebraska had Turner Gill, who later became a coach for the University of Buffalo and a few other schools. Anyway, so Nebraska needed to do something. They had the option that Jeff Smith scored the touchdown instead of Mike Rozier. Nebraska decided to go for 2 and the national title. They could have kicked the extra point, tied the game, and remember, ties were not broken until 1996. So Nebraska would have been the number 1 team if they went for the extra point. But Tom Osborne decided to go for 2, and unfortunately, it got knocked down, kind of jump-starting Miami's dynasty in the 1980s and bringing Nebraska down a bit. So basically, everything just ended that way. But it had to be done. Number 5 is a famous plane crash in 1970 that killed many of the Marshall University players and all that. Well, this was actually the second crash in more than a month. On October 2nd, 1970, 14 Wichita State players died in a plane crash alongside 17 other people. But November 14th, 1970 was way worse. Marshall lost to East Carolina 17-14 in Greenville, North Carolina. We're flying back to West Virginia. Unfortunately, though, there was a massive crash, and 37 members of the Marshall football team, 5 coaches, 7 staff members, 21 boosters or fans, 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants, and a charter coordinator died. All 75 on board. Kind of pathetic and all that. So yeah, there was a massive accident and all that. They said that it was terrible sources and all that. But anyway, there were recommendations for heads-up displays, HUDs, ground proximity warning devices, and surveillance of flight operations. So it was just unbelievable. They would have a mass funeral at the Veterans Memorial Fieldhouse. All classes were canceled and all that. It was just awful and all that. So anyway, they had to try to build a team from scratch, if you will. Now, the NCAA had a rule that you couldn't use freshmen on the varsity squad, but the NCAA granted Marshall permission because of everything that happened. In 1972, freshmen were allowed to play varsity sports. All that. So anyway, Marshall would actually be 9-33 over the next 3 seasons, which was kind of awful. Marshall got a little bit better as time went on. All that. There was a movie called We Are Marshall in which Matthew McConaughey, all right, was Jack Langwell, the guy who had to build Marshall's college football team from scratch. Number 4 is the Nevin Shapiro scandal from 2011. Miami had a lot of scandals going on. In 1980, they had basically been implicated as thugs and all that because they were hanging out with Two Live Crew. They were basically using desert fatigues in their national championship game against Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl, refusing to sit with Penn State at a barbecue, saying that the Americans didn't sit down with the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. Their words, not mine. So anyhow, this scandal was rumored. There were a lot of booster problems, and Miami basically had to lose games and be thugs and all in the 90s. And that's when the Orange Bowl was basically a place of woe. And then, of course, Nevin Shapiro had the improper benefits, years of investigations, and NCAA sanctions. The worst part was Miami didn't really learn their lesson. And the Miami president, Donna, what's her name, was supposed to fix the problem, but she was always shown with Nevin Shapiro. So basically, she was in on it too, even though she promised to clean up Miami's act. You know, ESPN 30 for 30 did the U part one and then the U part two. That was part two was with the Nevin Shapiro show and all that. So anyway, number three is the App State victory over Michigan. Yes, this is one of the most massive upsets in NCAA football history, but it's bad for many reasons because of the fact that a school like Appalachian State could beat Michigan. Now, you know, lower ranked teams, lower schools have beaten higher teams before, but Appalachian State beating Michigan, who were number 5 in the nation. Yeah, you beat Michigan if they're unseeded. That's fine, unranked. But App State beat Michigan, who were number 5, and that was on opening day 2007. And that was the opening implications of the Big Ten network with Tom Brenneman, who called a very big Fiesta Bowl game between Boise State and Oklahoma, but he was the main guy for Big Ten Network. And Michigan had the game against Appalachian State. It was brutal and all that to be number 5 and you lose App State. Now, App State was no like spring chickens. App State actually were the 2-time IAA or what they now call the FCS champions. So, like, they were national champs in a sense. App State even got votes to be part of the top 25, which they didn't get. Michigan would fall to Oregon based on the Statue of Liberty played by Dennis Dixon, and Michigan fell flat. What many people did not even realize was that this was actually the start of something terrible. As the 2007 season is one of the biggest upset laden seasons in history. Like there's been plenty of videos about it. There's a couple of videos that I swear by it. I swear by, but you know, it was just crazy. All the upsets, the number 1 teams to fall, the number 2s falling on several occasions, including West Virginia, who just needed to beat the tar out of Pittsburgh, or basically USC beating up on Stanford, even though they were number 2. Yeah. Number 2 is the Penn State scandal 2011. I don't really need to go into too much detail. I think you kind of know what I'm talking about. Abuse, obsessed with a cover up. Penn State was basically screwed over. $60 million fine. They had their wins vacated and all that for like 13 years and massive damage and all that. It was very dark. Jerry Sandusky used his charity connections to prey on innocent kids, both male and female. I mean, that's just pure stupidity and all that. And Joe Pa getting in trouble. At first, I thought Joe Paterno was just basically a scapegoat, but then I learned later on that Joe Pa actually did know about Sandusky's things and covered it up. What a mistake. Joe Paterno could be one of the greatest legendary coaches of all time. Paterno didn't even last too long. He died in January 2012. So, yeah, that's big. And number 1 is the big boy, the death penalty, SMU 1987. Remember when I said that the Southwestern Conference had all those violations and all the schools pitting up violations? Well, SMU's took the cake. SMU had a couple of massive booster problems, including the era in which Craig James and Eric Dickerson was part of SMU back in 1981, when they were pretty good, almost number 2 in the nation. SMU was basically a big school. They were playing out of Texas Stadium in Dallas, which was, you know, no small feat. But yeah, SMU just had problems. Boosters were accused of giving like cash and all that, the NCAA basically told them to stop. And that's what happened. SMU assured everyone that they had not made the payments. So everything looked a-okay. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And they basically were lying. Um, a lot of people said they were lying about it because they kept having to pay these players, because the fact is they can't just stop, because then the players probably will get angry and rat them out. So they had to pay in everyone. Worst of all, SMU president and actually governor of Texas at the same time, Bill Clements, basically had issues and all that with a handwriting analyst, and basically he knew about the scandal and all that and kept the funding going. A lot of people said, and as people said, they said they had to keep paying the money, because then they would have, if they didn't pay the money, then they would have been in deep trouble. It still would not have mattered. SMU really were bit. February 1987, the NCAA Ethics Commission came to SMU campus and announced the death penalty, which meant that SMU could not take part in the 1987 NCAA football season, becoming the first school to hit the death penalty mark. The guy who set up the death penalty, he actually fainted near the TV cameras when he made that announcement. So yeah, well, the main thing is that if you watch ESPN 30 for 30's Pony XS, that is one of the best 30 for 30s around, is Pony XS. I compare that to June 17, 1994, the whole OJ thing. But yeah, Pony XS was pretty impressive and explains SMU's problems, and that, the athletes needed to pay money to help their families out who were struggling. That's what many people do. SMU was even told that their players could move to other NCAA schools without having to sit out the year, because at the time when they transferred, they had to sit out a year. But they said that you don't have to, like, lose a year, because it's not your fault. Like the player, like most of the clean players basically were told, if you're clean and all that, you're allowed to move. SMU suffered. They couldn't play in 87. They were allowed to play in 88 with a lightened schedule, but they failed not to. They didn't sign it not to. So yeah, 1988 they didn't. In 1989 they basically used so many freshmen, it was huge. Forrest Gregg, the legendary SMU player and former Toronto Argonauts and Green Bay Packers coach, look up people, came in to try to clean the program. It took them like 3 decades before they got back into prominence and all that. So yeah, that's just how, the death penalty can ruin it, and that's the only time in NCAA history that had to be awarded. So that's that. Thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.